Welcome to the Capitalist Corner. I'm Michael Liebowitz, and as you can see, I am here all alone today, which is going to have to be fine. And I'm sure it will be because I've got the help of a great audience who I'm sure will ask compelling questions and make insightful comments. So that's all wonderful, wonderful stuff. Just to put the formalities out there, I also host a podcast called The Rational Egoist, which I recommend that everybody tune into. We have great episodes. Today, there's a new episode has been released. It's the philosopher Andrew Bernstein and I discussing the movie Tombstone. And I think we bring a pretty good commentary, interesting stuff. I'm also the vice chairman of the American Capitalist Party. Mark Pellegrino is the chairman, and you can find us at AmericanCapitalistParty.org. So please do so. Hello, everybody. I see there's a lot of good afternoons and hellos in the chat. So this weekend on, I guess, Fox News, Dan Bongino and Kash Patel came out and said that they believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. They think that the official narrative is accurate. Ever since I've heard people talking about how there's no way he could have committed suicide, that, the guards would have seen him, or, the idea that the camera was broken is just, that's impossible. I knew all that was BS. I don't know that he killed himself. I wasn't there, and I haven't done a deep dive into the situation, but nothing about the case surprises me, or it says to me that there's no way he could have done it. I firmly believe he could have. But that's not really what I want to talk about right now. What I want to talk about is this. There were a lot of people who both trust Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and think that they're there to drain the swamp and to get to the bottom of things. People that think Donald Trump is in Washington to drain the swamp. But now these guys are saying that it likely was a suicide. So I wonder, the people who hold both views, that these guys are trustworthy and they're going to drain the swamp, and that Jeffrey Epstein could not have committed suicide, I wonder where they're going to fall on this. I wonder what they're going to say about this. Because the cognitive dissonance, it seems to me, would have to be there. One of your beliefs is clearly wrong. Now, one guy told me today, and it's a guy that I like and I discourse with, seems like a smart guy. He is under the impression that they must be afraid now about the people that actually killed Jeffrey Epstein, and that's why they're saying it was a suicide. And this guy is not a conspiracy theorist. I just want to put that out there. But I think his statement is indicative of conspiracy theorists, is because anybody that's ever engaged them, and I engaged them for decades while incarcerated, it's very much akin to a religious mindset. And what I mean is this. I was talking to a Muslim friend of mine once, and I asked him, I said, well, what evidence could come forward that would cause you to no longer believe in Islam? And he said, there isn't any. Okay, but then there's no sense ever debating or discussing it, because you're just going to hold the view. Similarly, with religion, there's all kinds of tripwires, self-protective mechanisms. For instance, to the claim, well, God acts in mysterious ways that we just can't understand, or, the devil is just blinding you to what the truth is. The point is that there's no way to ever resolve it, because there's no way such a person will ever be falsified. So having the discussion is, in many ways, pointless. The problem is these people vote. They live in society with us, so they inevitably affect us. And it's an epistemological problem where people don't have an adequate method of engaging reality, of learning. I don't know if it's intentional dishonesty, if it's intentional evasion, if it's a biological issue. I just know that it's an issue. And I wonder what the audience thinks about this. So if anybody has any thoughts on Jeffrey Epstein or Kash Patel, MAGA, conspiracy theorists in general, feel free to share. Robert Naser says MAGA hates vaccines, but they're not bothered by Trump's Operation Warp Speed. They believe in a free economy, but Trump's tariffs don't bother them. That's true. And there's just no way to convince such people unless they're going to have a situation where they maybe a come to Jesus moment where they drop their pretense or they switch their epistemology. As long as they're locked in that box, there's no way to get them out of it. And it's unfortunate, and it's really unfortunate for the rest of us, right? So the next topic I'm going to cover is there's an article today on Brian Kaplan's Substack. Brian Kaplan is an economics professor at George Mason University. I've interviewed him, I think, 3 times. So, first, Race Jacobson said the coroner ruled it a suicide and there was no evidence of foul play. Anything else is immaterial. And I'm inclined to believe that. And I'm inclined to agree. And Greg Lewis says their view from a cage. Thanks for the shout out. Greg is referencing my book, View from a Cage, My Transformation from Convict to Crusader for Liberty. So Brian Kaplan has this article and it's called The Prevalence of Marxism in America. And he has a list here, and he goes through the various disciplines. And the physical sciences, 0.3% call themselves radical, 2.6% consider themselves activists, and 0% consider themselves Marxist. In the social sciences, 24% consider themselves radical, 20% consider themselves activists, and 17.6% consider themselves Marxist. All in all, he goes through a few more disciplines, but the total is 3% of academics consider themselves Marxist. And he makes an interesting point because he says that don't be deceived by the 3% and think it's a small number. And similarly, he says don't be deceived by the rounding up 18% of social sciences, social people in the social sciences, academics in the social sciences that consider themselves Marxists. And he makes the point. He said if 18% of biologists called themselves creationists, that would be a big deal and it would be a big, big problem. And he says the fact that, Marxism has about, thank you, Ashley Shrugged. Yes, hit the like button. He says the fact that Marxism or that the social sciences, he says Marxism basically is as illogical as creationism. So the fact that 18% of the people working in the social sciences are Marxists is a problem. And I agree wholeheartedly. I agree. The question is, what do you do about it? And there's another article that I came across today from Cato that talked about the prevalence of young people embracing socialism, embracing Marxism. Clearly, this seems to me like a failure of education. I think it does go back again to a proper epistemology. The thing is, when you have a proper method of learning, you open yourself up to being corrected, right? We're fallible beings, so we can make mistakes. We could be drawn to things based on faulty premises, on not enough information, whatever. But when you have the correct method, you can be corrected. You can learn, grow, improve. When I'm discussing something with a rational person, that person might show me that I'm incorrect. It's happened to me many times. I grow and I learn from it. But if I don't have the proper epistemology, if I'm just accepting things, for instance, on faith, well, there's no way to argue against faith. Somebody's just going to believe what they want. What can you say? And I tend to think that, with the bodies that have been piled up due to Marxism, with Mises's utter just destruction of socialism, of Bombarwerk, that's how I pronounce it. There's some other way to pronounce it, but I don't know how to pronounce it. But he eviscerated Marxism. And, Ayn Rand put forth a moral argument for capitalism. These things are very, very powerful. And yet people still believe it. And the fact that, professors believe this is absolutely insane to me. So Liquid Zulu comes in and he says, what is objectivism? What is the literal definition of the word objectivism? Well, the problem here is that you have a standard definition of the word objectivism, like you're going to find in in any dictionary. And then there's the special philosophy of Ayn Rand, which would ultimately be defined a little bit differently. Let's see, Chandler says it's the philosophy of Ayn Rand, and I would agree. Now, I will look it up. I mean, there's other definitions of the word, but ultimately, I think are you talking with Zulu? Type the comment in specifically about Ayn Rand's philosophy, or are you talking about the broader definition that we would find in dictionaries? Okay, define. Okay, so and Subie says yes. Hit the like button. The AI overview says Objectivism, a philosophical system developed by Ayn Rand, emphasizes objective reality, reason, and individual happiness as the moral purpose of life. That, of course, would be Ayn Rand's philosophy. The dictionary defines Objectivism as the tendency to lay stress on what is external or independent of the mind, and the philosophical dictionary definition is the belief that certain things, especially moral truths, exist independently of human knowledge or perception of them. So there's clearly a slight difference here, and whether or not Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, I think, is the definition of Objectivism. The essential thing that distinguishes it from everything else is the fact that Ayn Rand created the whole philosophical system. Now, Ayn Rand, of course, was once asked, can you on one foot explain, what Objectivism is? And I can't remember everything that she said, but I remember that she said, metaphysics, objective reality, epistemology, reason, ethics, egoism, politics, capitalism, and art or aesthetics, romantic realism. So that's what I think is the definition, of it. If somebody else wants to come in better, that's fine with me. We have another question. Liquid Zulu says Ayn Rand had a philosophical change of heart, activism, because they were that ultimately would be dependent on a lot of factors that I don't know that we can address today. She certainly was within her rights as the founder of the philosophy, I would say, to change it. She was also perfectly fine to say, I'm no longer an objectivist, I'm going to go believe something differently. That, of course, didn't happen. Ayn Rand died with a full philosophical system intact. Given that Ayn Rand is the one that developed it and named it for what it was, I don't see how somebody else can come along and say, no, Objectivism is this, I'm going to change it to something else. That does not mean, however, of course, that Ayn Rand was automatically right about anything. What it means, or that Ayn Rand covered everything that ever took place, or every philosophical subject that could ever arise. All it means is that whatever philosophical discussion somebody makes, or somebody, any philosophical discovery someone happens to make, are not then, it's not objectivist. So this guy comes in and says Zulu is a troll, who cares? He's actually not a troll. Zulu is actually a philosopher that I disagree with. I've had him on my show. I've disagreed with him. He's welcome to come in and ask whatever questions that he wants, as is everybody else. So, I mean, I don't know. Like, what would be the suggestion from Yo Drew YT? Get rid of him? Alan Thomas says, how does this relate to political society, the MAGA voters, and the 35% or more that don't vote? How does this relate to the percentage of social scientists that consider themselves radical or Marxist? Well, broadly speaking, a person's philosophy dictates all those things. So it is relevant. It's all relevant. I mean, you can't just negate things because we happen to not like them or we disagree with them or whatever. We engage opposing points of view, and that's how we grow and learn. As I said earlier when I was discussing epistemology, we don't simply say, oh no, this guy's question is irrelevant. He's on a show called The Capitalist Corner that's hosted by two objectivists, that discusses a lot of things that are stemming from Ayn Rand's philosophy. So, I mean, he's perfectly welcome to be here. I'm sorry if people don't like that, but somebody might not like your questions. Okay, yeah, Liquid Zulu says he doesn't want to monopolize the discussion. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, we can meet up and we'll talk about it another time. I appreciate that. And Chandler makes a very good point. Chandler says people are often bewildered at the idea that philosophy has an impact on anything. So I happen to agree, and it's very interesting. If you read Ayn Rand's essays, both Philosophy, Who Needs It, and I think it's Philosophical Detection, she stresses this point: how many people parrot the ideas of philosophers that they've never even heard of, that they don't even know, but yet they're expressing the opinions of a Kant, of a Nietzsche. So philosophy is absolutely vital to the discussion of politics. We can't simply just go and constantly look at the concretes. You need to have a philosophical system by which to evaluate those concretes. Race Jacobson says banning Marxism or even Nazism would be just as immoral as banning objectivism or Christianity. I'm with you, Race. I think people have a right to speak. Now, that doesn't mean, let me just say quickly, I and Mark reserve the right to not allow people to discuss things on this show. I mean, if somebody wants to come on and discuss house painting, I'm going to say no. I just happen to think that the questions that Liquid Zulu was asking of an objectivist, a largely objectivist audience, and asking of me as an objectivist, I think are highly relevant to the discussion, especially given that we were discussing epistemology and how it relates to the opinions of the opinions of whether it be the college kids or the 18 to 19s that are coming about, that are favoring socialism now. So I do think that the questions are relevant. Ian Gilmore says you can change your mind about reality because you're changing your mind about your evaluation of what reality is. We don't have an infallible method, so error is possible. 100% agree, Ian. That's why having a viable epistemology is vital so that we can correct our errors. Alan Thomas says, speaking of Nietzsche, reevaluation of values is an essential process. What is a value is at the core of this in many previous discussions. Good point. Greg Lewis says podcaster's microphone under the YouTube umbrella. I don't understand. You got to elaborate a little. I think you should. I'd like to know. Greg Lewis is awesome, by the way. Greg Lewis, and I've mentioned this before. Greg Lewis has. Oh, I forgot to plug in the damn internet again. Hold on 1 second, people. Don't go anywhere. I'll be 30 seconds. Lewis once said to me in regard to a debate opponent I had that it's like trying to nail Jello to a tree because the guy was kind of evasive. And I thought that was great. Greg subsequently said that he did not coin the phrase. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, Greg Lewis is absolutely correct that I am not required to provide the microphone for any troll that demands it. I agree 100%. Robert Naser says, growing up, most of us assume that accepting any philosophy, the comments are coming in fast and heavy. He says, growing up, most of us assume that accepting any philosophy in whole was cultish, and authenticity implied picking and choosing whatever bits of each philosophy rang true for each of us. Essentially, eclecticism is that we have to be eclectic. We have to be open-minded. But there's another side to that too, Robert, because I don't think that means that we have to be, and I don't think this is what you're saying. I'm just saying it. I don't think we have to be slavish devotions to Ayn Rand's views either. I think that we're free to disagree with her when we believe she's wrong. But if we think that she's right, then we should say so. There's nothing in reality that necessitates that we have to disagree with somebody. I think it's highly likely that we will, given that we each have our own context, our own stances, and given that human beings are infallible. So I think it's unlikely that any human being is going to say something, everything that human being says is correct. Let me scroll back up. Okay, let me jump to another story here. That's what I'm going to do because, as we've said, it's my microphone. I can do what I want. So there's a story in Cato today that 50 plus Venezuelans imprisoned in El Salvador came to the U.S. legally, meaning they were not illegal immigrants. Furthermore, a CBS investigation found that 75% of the men on the list that they had of people incarcerated in Venezuela that were sent there from the US had no criminal record in the United States or abroad. In other words, the idea that this is only cause is not true. Now, of course, there's people out there that'll say, well, I don't trust Cato or I don't trust CBS. But here's the problem. The government is not being transparent about this. And if the government is not being transparent about it, then there's no way we could know. Furthermore, they're not offering due process to the people that they're sending there. So there's no court record. There's nothing. There's just the claims of the government ultimately. Greg Lewis says that he likes being infallible. Michael misspeak. Chandler says the fact that existence is primary is not something you can have a change of heart about. Okay. Yes, the article is actually on my X page, Liquid Zulu. I don't yet know how to go get all the articles and link them with this, so I just post them to X. You can find it, or you can just go to cato.org and find it as well. And this, this kind of brings me to another subject that I think about a lot, because I often hear, I don't know, right wingers or MAGA folks say, well, they weren't given due process. They didn't respect due process on the way in. Why should they be granted due process on the way out? Well, the problem here is they're not merely being deported, right? They're not merely being told to leave the country or being forced to leave the country. They're being sent to prison. Which means they're being deprived of their liberty, which means it's a violation of both the 5th and 14th Amendments, but which indicate that a person cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Chandler, I like Chandler. Chandler is kind of a comedian here. And here, Liquid Zulu, and this is why we keep him around. He says, how do they even know they are illegal immigrants without due process? And of course, you can't know that, which means that if we allow this to take place, we are all susceptible to the machinations of government. If the government can imprison and deport to another prison people without giving them due process, then what's to stop them from picking me up and sending me and not giving me due process and just claiming that I'm an illegal alien? This to me is, and actually, so I won't be, there won't be a Capitalist Corner tomorrow because I'm actually going to the Soho Forum debates tomorrow to watch Dave Smith debate with Alex Noreste on immigration, because I think immigration is one of the pressing issues of the day. I mean, either we believe in the individual rights of people to travel freely or we don't. And if we say that because you walked across the border without hurting anybody, violating anybody's rights, and you want to go work at a tavern somewhere, and we snatch that person and send them out, well, then what we're saying is the tavern owner doesn't have the right to serve whom he wishes, and the immigrant doesn't have the right to travel where he wishes. This is a clear violation of the rights of both. And if we are going to stand up for individual rights, as we are doing with the American Capitalist Party, AmericanCapitalistParty.org, we have to fight for immigrants. Greg Lewis says fighting injustice with injustice is hardly justice. And Greg Lewis, as usual, is right on point. I might have to stop complimenting all the commenters, though, because people are going to maybe get too confident, or maybe they're going to realize that they don't need me around if they know so much. So maybe I got to cut back on that just a little bit. But yes, people, remember, so tomorrow we will not be having a show tomorrow. The American Communist Party actually, and you can do research into this, they actually are not a real party at all. They're not registered as a party in the United States. So we actually are the real party. We are the real ACP. And those American Communist Party guys, by the way, are, let me just say, dishonest cowards. That's, I don't know, that's fair, I think. I don't like to insult people, but when you have people who, when engaging in debate, misrepresent your ideas, lie about you, post lies about you, and absolutely refuse to engage in honest debate unless they control the microphone and can mute you, what else can we say about them except they're dishonest cowards? I mean, it just seems readily apparent to me that that's what they are. So we got some posts, speaking of the American Capitalist Party. The American Capitalist Party has been posting some stuff, and the interest this holds for me is that they're posting things about the senator from Connecticut where I live. Not only is he a senator from Connecticut from where I live, but he's from the same town and went to the same high school as I did, although I don't know him. But people I know do know him. So in response to Chris Murphy's comment, I'll read ours first and then I'll address him. It says, governments don't feed children. They take resources from some individuals and redistribute them by force to others. Feeding children is the responsibility of parents and freely choosing individuals. Government guns should never enter the picture. That is in response to Chris Murphy, and this view gets 180,000 views from Senator Chris. He says there are provisions making huge cuts to child nutrition programs, 30% cuts to food for kids. Come on. That means Republicans are taking food away from 12.6 million people so billionaires can buy an extra yacht. Okay. It's a clear emotional appeal that has nothing to do with logic and nothing to do with facts. Chris Murphy wants to tug at your heartstrings. He wants to say, oh my God, children are starving. That's horrible. How can you do this? But he has no compassion for the people who are being robbed, who are being threatened in order to provide for these kids. And Chris Murphy, from what I understand, is pretty well off himself. So why doesn't he just live the life of a pauper and fund these things himself? Him and his buddies can go around and do it, right? So why do they need the government? If they're so adamant that this needs to happen, then just go do it. But again, they're playing on heartstrings. And in here, you have to, this is key. In his post, there's a premise buried. And when he says that they're taking money from the children, he's implying that these kids have a right to it. But what do they then have a right to? They have a right to the time, effort, and intelligence of other people. What you're saying, Chris Murphy, is that by dint of your need, by the fact that you need something, you have a claim on other people's time, energy, effort, intelligence at the point of a gun. It seems to me that many people oppose the USSR because they made people work at gunpoint. But I guess Chris Murphy thinks that because he wears a suit and gets to vote on these things, that that's not what he's doing. But he is. I've often told people, could you, if you were the one that had to commit the robbery, if you were the one that had to go put the gun in somebody's face and demand that they hand over money, their hard-earned money, to fund whatever pet project you have, could you do it? Could you do it? And I would be willing to bet dollars to peanuts that most of them could not do it. So that's some nonsense from Chris Murphy. Let's see. I think we've got some more from the American Capitalist Party commenting on Commodore or Comrade Murphy's post. And I'm not really saying Murphy's a communist. One of the things I hate is being loose with language and just identifying every political enemy as they're Marxist, because that's clearly not the case. So what we say in response to Chris Murphy is the government is a gun and shouldn't be in the business of insurance. Absolutely true. And by the way, Josh Hawley is threatening insurance companies in his hometown, in his home state. So he's a senator, but I guess everybody else is the rhino except for the guy who says we can't cut Medicaid, which he also said, and he's threatening insurance companies. So it says that the government has driven out competition, raised the cost of medical care, created scarcity. Perhaps protecting rights and not robbing some people to subsidize others should preoccupy you. Drop the spoil system democracy. Chris Murphy has said this. Rightfully, the cuts to Medicaid over 10 million people will lose their health care. He throws that in because he's trying to tug at your heartstrings. Again, it's an emotional appeal, not a logical argument. He says, "In the tax cuts for the rich have been the story of the disastrous Republican budget bill." And he says he read the whole thing, and there are some hidden rats in there you need to know about. Okay. The problem with the Republican budget bill is that it doesn't adequately cut spending. But Chris doesn't want to talk about that. Chris doesn't want to talk about how we're $37 trillion in debt and what the effect of that is going to be. Chris wants to talk about the poor people that are going to be hungry, that aren't going to be subsidized by hardworking people. That's what Chris wants to talk about. See, this is why it's important to go back to the beginning, that we engage philosophy, right? Because if you have a proper philosophy, if you're paying attention to, as I've disappeared off the screen, if you pay attention to what's actually happening in the world and assess it rationally, you immediately recognize that Chris is making an emotional argument, that his faulty premise is that people have the right to the time, energy, effort, and intelligence of other people. You recognize that Chris is no better than a common street thug because he thinks that his agenda can be implemented at the point of a gun. But unless you're able to evaluate Chris's claims by reference to a moral standard and evaluate it by means of a rational epistemology, you're lost. That is why these things are vital. And that's why I repeatedly stress it all goes back to epistemology. Now, some people step in and say, except when it goes to physics. But I got to say, epistemology and metaphysics are so interconnected, although they're different disciplines. I'm fine with saying it goes back to both. But I think that I'm not going to say that. They're intertwined. You need a correct metaphysics and you need a correct epistemology. Liquid Zulu, I have no idea if it's possible to have a split screen where we can read the articles. As you know, I'm very technically disadvantaged. So it's a miracle of modern science that I've been able to even set up a YouTube station and connect a microphone and share it. The rest is it's asking a lot because I'm a boomer adjacent who was out of society for a quarter century. So, there's just a lot of things that I do not know how to do. Race Jacobson says, "By the way, Mike, did I see the news about Ted Cruz wanting to create tax-funded saving accounts for children?" That is not on the queue today, Race. I passed by it. I have not read deeply about it, but I will tell you this. What is the difference between such a thing and Social Security, where the government takes money and saves it to do what they want to do with it? In the case of Social Security, not only did they decide that they're better able to save for people, that they're better able to do for people than the people are able to do for themselves, but subsequently they prove that they aren't because they raid the fund and spend the money. So now they're going to have a tax-funded children's thing where they're going to save for the kids, and what's going to happen? They're going to then spend that and then have to raise taxes again. Come on. I mean, it's beyond ridiculous. And, that's the nature of what we have going on. Ted Cruz, by the way, the strict constructionist, the constitutionalist, the guy who memorized the Constitution when he was 15 years old. He knows damn well there's nothing in Article 1, Section 8 that authorizes Congress to spend money on this kind of thing, to do this kind of thing. He knows that. He has to know it. So evidently he doesn't care. Because why? Because the same reason why, after Donald Trump attacked his family, attacked his wife, slandered him over and over again, smeared him, calling him a liar, Ted Cruz turned around and endorsed him and then defended him. Why? Because Ted Cruz ultimately is a political opportunist whose primary goal is to have and stay in power. That's what is most important to him. Not the Constitution, not individual liberty, not individual rights, power. Political power. Same with Mike Lee, for instance. I remember when Mike Lee was the Constitution touting guy. Now he's become just another Trump sycophant. And they're all over the place. And it should be a great warning to everybody about what happens. I don't know. Maybe Maybe it's not a matter of what happens to people when they're in power. Maybe it's these are the kind of people that seek power, which tells us all the more why we as the citizens have to strip them of this power and never, ever give it to them again. Race Jacobson says this will be worse. Race, it probably will. I'm going to tell you guys, I'm going to share a little pet peeve of mine with people since I'm here running my mouth. And, well, you can either listen or not. This is a big pet peeve of mine. So everybody, well, most people know I have a very violent history, and it's not restricted to the laws that I've broke. I mean, or the crimes I've been arrested for. I was a violent person growing up, very violent, very feared. And one of my pet peeves is that now that I'm not that person, I have people who will insult me and talk to me in ways, all the while claiming I'm not changed. They're depending on the very fact that I am. So what I mean by that is, if I were 20 years old and I was still what they're claiming I am now, they would never speak to me like that. If my friend Subie is in the audience, he can attest to what I'm talking about. But now they take it for granted that I am changed, all the while telling me I'm not changed. And it's just a very gross way to behave. It's a very cowardly way to behave. I've long had a belief that you don't say something to somebody first unless you'll say it to his face. So the hiding behind pseudonyms and, anonymous accounts, that's kind of gross to me. But also that you don't pick on people. You don't say something to somebody because you know that person is not going to harm you, but you'll pick on the people you know won't. So in prison, for instance, there's a common dynamic where, and there's the partially true myth, right, that sex offenders and child molesters have it tough in prison. It's partially true because some of them do. The ones who are small, the ones who are skinny, the ones without friends, the ones that are easily picked on are picked on, right? Those are the guys, everybody, they call them rippers. They pick on them. They take their stuff, whatever. But I've known guys who were in prison for child molestation and rape that nobody picks on. And I once had a conversation with a group of guys. They were all picking on, a little guy who was a sex offender. And I pointed at another guy and I said, well, fellas, that guy over there is in for the same thing. So why aren't you picking on him? And they said, well, he bench presses 400 pounds. Not men of conviction, are you? All you are is a bunch of gutless bullies. And that's what these online trolls are. They're gutless, cowardly bullies who, behind the anonymity of their computers, feel free to attack people, insult people, slander people, whatever. In prison, we called such people cell gangsters. They're people who, when the doors are closed, like to run their mouths a bit when nobody can get to them. Out here, I guess they're called keyboard warriors, which was something I was very fascinated to learn. Very, very fascinated to learn. So there's a conversation going on in the chat here. So let me see what it is. Liquid Zulu says the good man, that Jordan Peterson pointed out how the good man has the capacity to be a monster. And I actually think that it's far easier for a good person to degenerate into being a bad person than it is for a bad person to grow into a good person. And the reason is because the one takes effort, the other does not, right? In order to grow, in order to change, for instance, let me use myself as the example. I had to learn what it was about my thinking that was flawed. I had to study what the criminal personality consisted of, what criminal thinking consisted of, and I did this for many years, how to correct criminal thinking. But I also had to learn a proper method. I had to learn how to assess my behavior, by what gauge. And it was, the objectivist ethics. I needed a goal by which to go towards. But in order to degenerate into a bad person, and a bad person doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's violent. It doesn't have to be somebody that's robbing people, killing people. It could just be somebody that lies to people or steals from people. My friend Subie, if he wants to tell me, give permission to talk about the guy who did him wrong, I'd be very happy to. But if he doesn't, I understand that too. But in order to degenerate, it just takes not putting effort in. It just, by basically it's you either go forward or you go backwards, but going forward takes a lot of effort for some people. I mean, if you basically had the fundamentals taught to you and you learn them and practice them growing up and you're there, it's not that much of a step to grow. But when you're a horrible, horrible person, it's rough. And Subie here says, Sebastian Scalora, my very close friend and really my guardian angel since I was 14 years old. I'll tell you about him in a second. But he says people who were considered dangerous in my neighborhood didn't mess with Mike. It's true. He says Mike was ruthless. He has learned to use his words, and he laughs, but it's absolutely true. I have learned to use my words. Okay, so first I'll tell you two things. First, I want to tell you a bit about Subie. He's not a philosophical guy. He's not an objectivist. He's not somebody that's going to spend time reading papers on philosophy. He's just the nicest guy that you could ever meet. I first met Subie when I was 14 years old. The reason that I met him was because I lived in Wethersfield, which is a suburb. Subie lived in Hartford. It was the city. And I wanted to be cool. I wanted to fit in with the Hartford kids, the tough kids. So that's the people that I sought out. That's who I wanted to hang out with. And, for some reason, Subie liked me, and we clicked. And Subie protected me all the time. Subie's 3 years older than me. And anytime someone would mess with me, man, Subie would jump in and say, no one's messing with Mike. This is before I grew up, got older and became the dangerous person I was. So, but what that did, and it was emboldened me, and I got a big mouth at 14 and 15 and ran my mouth to everybody because I knew Subie would protect me and I knew Subie had friends. And Subie and I stayed friends. Subie grew out of the sort of troublemaker phase, rather young, maybe 18 or 19. He just grew out of it. He was done with it. I wasn't, but our friendship remained. And all through my incarceration, Subie was there for me. He would send me books. He would send me money if I needed it. He would make calls. He helped publish my first book. He took the lead in helping me to get out of prison. He gave me a place to stay when I got out, a job. Subie's the type of guy that talks to people in elevators. He is just the absolute nicest freaking guy you could ever meet. Sometimes, by the way, annoyingly so to me, because when I'm going somewhere, I don't want to stop and talk to everybody. I want to get the hell where I'm going. But Subie's very nice, and he'll just talk to everybody. If somebody's got a flat tire, he pulls over to help them, that kind of guy. So about a year ago, Subie had an employee. And this is what I'm talking about, a bad guy. This guy is not going to, what we would say in the big house, he's not going to throw a rock in a riot, right? He's not going to throw rice at a wedding. But when Subie first bought the current house, he found out that very recently somebody had broken into the house and got arrested for doing so. And Subie met the guy and he told him, look, I'll give you a chance. I'll give you a job. Yeah, you come work for me. And Subie gave the guy a job. He ultimately let the guy move in with him for a while. When I moved out with my girlfriend, Melissa, who passed away, I moved in with her, and Subie let this guy move in and still working for him. And Subie's best friend passed away a few months after my girlfriend passed away. And, Subie was going through a hard time, and all of a sudden he found out that one of his tools was missing. Subie's a landscaper and a tile worker by trade. And he found out that, I think it was a weed whacker, it was missing from his car. And so he goes and he says to the employee, hey, what happened? Where'd this go? And the guy said, no, it disappeared. I don't know. Someone must have stolen it. So Subie's under the impression now that this thing has been stolen. In the meantime, he gets a complaint from a customer that the weeds aren't whacked. And Subie explains, listen, my friend just died. The weed whacker's gone. Someone stole it. And the guy says, oh, my bad. I'm sorry. So the other day, Subie goes over to this guy's house to do the lawn. And he sees that something's buried underneath grass in the back. And he goes and he finds, and it's his weed whacker. And on the day that it was reported stolen, his employee went there to work. And it was broken. So evidently he broke it. And Subie asked him, was the weed whacker still in the truck when you went to that house? And he said, no. So basically what happened was you have a guy that had a checkered past, to say the least. Subie did everything for the guy, including giving him a job and moving him into his home. And the guy turns around and doesn't even have decency to tell him when he breaks his weed whacker. Instead, he lies and says it's stolen. That's a bad guy, right? He's not a murderer. He's not going to kill you. He's not going to stick a gun in your face. He's still a bad guy. You don't do that to people. You don't break their stuff and then not tell them, especially the people who do things for you. That is awful. Now, people have free will. The guy could change, the guy could grow. But the point is, to go from where he is to get to be a good person is going to require a monumental amount of effort that, from my perspective, I haven't seen that this individual is willing to put forth that effort. So that's my story about my close friend Subie and me. I've told you quite a bit. If anybody ever has any personal questions about me, feel free to ask. I'm an open book. I don't hide from things. I don't pretend reality other than it is. So I'm open to it. So remember, folks, we will not have a show tomorrow, but we will be back Thursday. I believe Mark Pellegrino will be with me on Thursday. And my capitalist thought for the day is, as long as somebody is talking about a relevant topic, and as long as somebody is arguing in good faith, even if they're wrong or we believe they're wrong, I think that we ought to engage them. It's the way that we learn, that we grow. If I have a discussion, for instance, with Liquid Zulu, and if you want the philosophy that I believe in, that you believe in, to spread, then it's helpful to talk to somebody that's reasonable, even if he disagrees, because I might change Liquid Zulu's mind. Conversely, it's in my interest, if I'm wrong about something, to have my mind changed. So in the interest of growth, I think open dialogue with rational people is vital. And with that, I'm going to be taking off. Remember to check out the Rational Egoist podcast, and remember to go to AmericanCapitalistParty.org. And finally, remember to check your premises. See ya.